resurrection of Jesus in a very special way. What power, what glory, what honor, what security, what hope. We're grateful. We live in a world of turmoil and dismay and sin. And some of our own brothers and sisters are wrestling with illnesses and struggles now. And we think of Bonnie Cole and George and Patsy Hunt. Just so many others, Father, that lost loved ones, and we just ask that you bless them. You are the God of all comfort. Comfort them and bless them. But we give you thanks and ask you to be with us as we study this very difficult book. In Jesus' name. Okay, here we go. Let's just really quick through. I know you've seen this before a lot, but basically Leviticus says, how's God going to keep from killing all these people? He lives right there amongst them, right there in the middle of them. So, and they are sinful, they're weak, they're foolish, they're stupid, they're unclean. So how does a holy God live in a sinful and people? Which is kind of just really interesting. Why would he want to? And yet he does, and wants to live with us. And so what he does is he establishes the tabernacle and its worship, which we talked about extensively with the priesthood. And of course, Israel is surrounds the tabernacle. The Levitical priests are on the inner circle, and everybody else is on the outer circle to separate God from the people. In the book of Leviticus, this is the outline of it. The offerings and sacrifices that are up front, the priesthood and ordination, the purification codes that we're in now, the Day of Atonement, the holiness code, the redeeming the vows. That's the entire book of Leviticus. Gives you a nice overview of where we are and what we're heading toward. And again, we're in the purification code at the moment. Any questions, thoughts on that? No? Okay. Purification code, chapter 11 through 15. We talked last week about the dietary aspects, childbirth aspects, skin diseases and mold, including house diseases. That's what mold is like. And cleansing from the skin diseases and mildew. And then today, my favorite topic, discharges. Okay. Remember that God is wanting his people to be able to distinguish between the holy and the common, that is the ordinary. This is very important because whenever you talk about childbirth, you talk about discharges of semen, you talk about sexual relations, that's the ordinary. Nothing wrong with the ordinary. That's just life. But it is separate from the holy. And common, the ordinary, is usually clean. But sometimes there's unclean, ritual impurity. And that's a lot of what Leviticus deals with. Ritual impurity is not sin, but it is there. But you say uncleanness is not necessarily due to sin, but it did prohibit the contact with the tabernacle and sacrificial system. Nothing unclean can go in the presence of or be involved with Yahweh. All right. So, we talked about last week, clean and unclean, the dietary, the land, and the way that it breaks down is land animals, aquatic animals, fowl, flying insects. You don't eat flying insects. Who would do that anyway? Except there is one exception to flying insects. Yes, grasshoppers, locusts, things like that. Locusts and wild honey. Also, you can't eat animals that go about on their paws. That means dogs, cats, whatever, and other unsavory critters like reptiles, lizards, weasels, rats, and more. And we talked about what makes a critter clean or unclean. We gave you these 6 options. We gave you a handout on it. Symbolic view, the ethical, hygienic, morphological, theological views. If you want that handout, if you don't have it, I'll give it to you. But they're just, just a question mark of how do you know what's clean and unclean? And we talked about clean and unclean being in childbirth. A woman was unclean for 7 days, she had a baby boy. Unclean 14 days, she had a baby girl, so forth and so on. And we talked about the differences there. And the short answer is, we don't know why. that God would do this. But there's impossibility. We talked about clean and unclean skin diseases. This is where it really gets exciting. Where if you have a swelling rash or shiny spot, a sea of defiling skin. It's kind of funny, how Leviticus colors your thinking. Karen says, "I got this bump right here. Can you take a look at this?" And I look down and say, "You probably ought to go to the priest." Your thoughts get contaminated, for a better term, by Leviticus. So if you have a boil on the skin, a sore on your head or chin, white spots on your skin, or if you're bald, you're okay, you're good. But if you got a reddish white sore, time to go to the priest. Okay. So we got that. Clean and unclean mold for both the house and the leather or cloth articles. And the priest examines, he isolates it. If it doesn't spread, wash it and you're good. If it does spread, burn that favorite sweater. And by the way, it's kind of interesting in chapter 13 and 14, where if you have a house, which is kind of interesting, God is anticipating 40, 50 years into the future, but they're living in cities. If you have a house, and they got mold, you got to call the mold abatement team. All right. And we talked about the clean and unclean, how if that thing remained, you were to go outside the camp in torn clothes and unkempt hair, and you were exiled from the community, from life as you knew it. But if there was a possibility of cleansing and renewal, that's why it's so important. When Jesus heals the lepers, first off, it's just incredible that he touches them. You're not supposed to do that. And he pronounces them cleansed. But he did tell this guy, you go and show yourself to the priest and do the offerings. And we talked about that was a long rigmarole step. Any questions now between sacrifices, purity code, anything like that? I can tell you're excited. Oh man, listen, I look for a picture graph to go with this, and it's kind of like there's nothing out there. So the only thing I can think of is like you're going to talk about this, and it's like, well, yeah, it's in the Bible. I've got an adult audience here, so y'all pay yourself. So anyway, chapter 15 is really kind of intriguing to me how this thing is outlined. It's some of the scholars call it an A-B outline. You have unusual bodily discharge, or you have the emission of semen and the monthly period, and then the ongoing blood. See the thing there? You have two biggies at the beginning and the end, and two regulars in the middle. And then, of course, he sums it up. So, if you have an unusual bodily discharge, if you're married, and you're saying, Harvey, what does that entail? Don't ask me that. You know what that means. Typically, it has to do with bodily discharges. Okay. Well, what if you have an emission of semen, that is, and or sexual relations with a woman? Well, not clean. Well, it's that time of the month. Every woman has it before a certain age. And it's like, you're unclean. And then, unfortunately, again, this looks like it's women, so it's male and female. You have an ongoing bloody discharge and remedy. Already your mind is going to the book of Luke, where Jesus heals a woman with a bloody discharge. Very significant. We'll go talk about that. And then in verses 31 through 32, he offers a summation. So let's get to it. Okay. He says, and this is the guy now, if you have an unusual body discharge and remedy, and I guess we're talking, let's just say it, we're talking pus, blood, whatever, this is nasty. So anything that this guy, first off, he's unclean. But anything he sits on, lies on, anything he rides on, anybody who touches what he sits on, lays on, rides on, is unclean. so you begin to say, I wonder, I always in the book of Leviticus, I was just, why? Why are you saying that? And the big answer is, God, why do you say that? I don't know. But there's a possibility. We'll get that in just a second. Okay, so if you touch it, by the way, if you get spit on, can you imagine that? The guy walks around, he's got some kind of unclean discharge, and he spits on you. What, dude? What are you doing? Why are you spitting on me? Anything, you just don't have contact with this guy. So, if he gets over this, then he oh, by the way, even when he touches without washing his hands. Can you imagine that? We go through church, shaking hands. It's like, no. You gotta wash his hands first. Okay. If he has touched a household article, a clay pot, you break the clay pot. If it's wood, you rinse it. Why is that? Here's the core. This guy's got a nasty infectious problem. You don't want him touching a porous vessel that could harm the infection. You don't want him touching you without washing his hands. You don't want anything to do with his things, his bedding, his clothing, because you might catch the diabolicus. Okay? So it also prohibited the interaction with the sanctuary. Why? It was unclean. Again, not a sin, but unclean. All right. He was to count 7 days, wash his clothes, bathe in fresh water. On the 8th day, he brought 2 doves. So you know where that's heading. Yep, they were a burnt offering and a sin offering and made atonement. Atonement does not necessarily mean forgiveness of sins. It just means to make one right again with God. Okay, so that's an unusual body discharge. Again, we looked at this last week. Is he sinner? Is he, what's wrong with this guy? It's ritual separation. The ordinary things of life. Nowhere is he forgiven because there's nothing to be forgiven. All right. So, well, here we are. The emission of semen and sexual intercourse. 2 things you really want to discuss in Bible class.
At least they're paying you for this. I'm sorry, never mind.
Actually, I am on staff, so it's kind of like, this is part of my hazard pay. All right, well, let's get to it. If the guy has an emission of semen, he's unclean. Bathe the body, unclean to leave it. If his semen gets on anything, you got to wash it. It's unclean to leave it. So, there you have it. And again, you get back to this, the ordinary versus the holy, the common versus the holy, the clean versus the unclean. And so for some reason this is considered unclean, but this is also part of the ordinary. I mean, come on guys, we're adults. Emissions of semen, they happen, What about sexual intercourse? Well, if there's an emission of semen, and there usually is, you bathe with water, you're unclean to leaving. So I look at this and I just kind of think, what if you just married? What if you're on your honeymoon? How's it going to work? It's just like, I don't know. We're just going to stay unclean for a while.
At least you're unclean together.
You're unclean together, and that's togetherness counts.
Just do everything in the morning.
Yeah.
You gotta wait till the evening. What happens if you do it in the evening? You gotta wait till the next evening.
I was wondering
How does that work?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess
You're the teacher, Ron.
it's like, well, you just thinking of all these scenarios. Just like you would like have relations in the morning, and it's kind of like in the middle of the afternoon. It's like, babe, how about it? No, it's okay. So anyway, there you go. But again, notice how what's the cure? It's very simple. Bathe. You're clean. Because it's not sin, it's uncleanness, it's a ritual impurity.
So, but you have to stay away from people until the cleansing.
I would assume, but don't know. It doesn't
How do
specify.
you get like a job done?
Well, again, it doesn't specifically say this. The guy with the discharge, yeah, you don't want to touch anything he touches. This is kind of like, this is part of life, you know?
So just, you wouldn't go to the temple, but you could maybe be around people.
Right. Okay. Any other thoughts? Good. Okay. Now, part of this is cool. Part of the problem here is that a lot of ancient religions were fertility religions. What does that mean? It means that you had ritual intercourse, either with a temple prostitute or with your family or concubine or whatever. And sexuality was seen as part of the worship of gods. You may remember that in Corinth there were temple prostitutes. What were they there for? They're called prostitutes and temple prostitutes for a reason. Because when you had ritual sexual intercourse, you were invoking the gods. And in fact, if you had ritual sexual intercourse, you were invoking that god or deity to bless rainfall or the fertility of your animals or crops. This was very big in an agrarian culture. And so God is separating that very common ordinary thing from his worship. Again, we look back and we say, okay, is this common? Yes, but it's not holy. It's just, this is life. Of course, the New Testament pretty well blesses that union and that sexuality. Remember that whenever you were talking about, you read about Baal and Asherah and all these deities and everything in the Old Testament. Those were fertility religions. You invoke them because they provided you with abundant livestock, corn, oil, and wine, and all the necessities of life. That's why God's getting about it. He says, you're worshiping Baal, thinking that he's providing you this? He's not providing you this. I'm providing you with this. So,
I struggle with this in the New Testament too, because a lot of the non-Jewish people that were coming into church were coming from some of these religions, and
absolutely,
they had to address it because to them it was normal. And they're, okay, well, you don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
That's not how it works.
Absolutely. You remember in Acts 15 when there's this big brouhaha and conference about what we were going to require of the Gentile believers. And so they said, we're not going to put the law of Moses on them. We're just telling them to not eat meat, sacrifice to idols, not drink blood, and to abstain from sexual immorality. Probably for that very reason. Okay. Uh-oh. Please don't tell me we should all shut
That's my line.
up. Okay. Well, we have got a monthly time every month. And so the woman is impure for 7 days, covering the time of her period, whether it's long or short. So whatever she lays on or sits on, it's unclean. Whoever touches it is unclean. They have to bathe and wash their clothes. You think about it. You remember how important blood is? The life is in the blood, and that's the reason you took a live animal into the temple courts or the tabernacle courts and sacrificed it. It was giving its life for yours. And yet a period suggests that the body has rejected that particular blood or that particular opportunity for life. And it symbolized death as one aspect or one perspective on that. So, and again, you look at this, it's like, it's like good for the woman, right? She doesn't have to, she can lay down, she can sit down, doesn't have to tend to the kids, the guys are taking care of it. course, if he touches anything that she sits or lays on, he's unclean. Oh, what about if you have sexual intercourse during your period? Happens. He's unclean. He has to hang out with her in ritual impurity for 7 days, whether it's a full time of her 7 days or an extra 7 days. It really doesn't say, but probably her impurity time. All right, but there is a problem with discharges a la New Testament time period. That is, it's basically ditto for the man. That's for the man. You don't touch, you don't spit, you don't shake hands, and there's a similar cleansing procedure. Again, this is one of those just bad things that happen. It's not equal to sin, but ritual separation. Luke chapter 8. A woman who had had a ritual or a discharge for 12 years, no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. I love this picture. I'm not sure who did it, but you look and you see obviously the Jesus figure right there in white. He is pressed about by people wanting to talk to him, touch him, like Jesus, and what is his mission right then? Do you remember? You're right. Look, go ahead.
He's on his way to someone's house.
Jairus.
Yeah, to his daughter's
dying. Sick and dying. So Jesus is pushing through this maddening crowd, and he says to the disciples, somebody touch me. It's really kind of interesting because it's like they're looking at him and saying, you see the people around you? What do you mean somebody touched you? Of course he touched you. But I love this picture because you see him, all this, and it's like, oh wait. There she is. Touch. It's a beautiful picture. I think it's the neat way the artist has presented that. So she would have definitely fallen into this Leviticus 15 regime. You must keep the Israelites separate from things that make them unclean. Remember, holy, common, clean, unclean. So they will not die in their uncleanness for defiling my dwelling place. You didn't interact with the holy when you were in a state of uncleanness. And I think that's a key passage. Okay. We talked about dietary, childbirth, skin diseases, house diseases, cleansing from house diseases and skin diseases, and male and female discharges, both normal and abnormal. Aren't you excited? You made it through the Purification Code, chapters 11 through 15. Any questions, thoughts, comments? And again, it's like, well, why? Well, anything out of the ordinary, different from the ceremonial clean, renders you impure, not always sin. Anything especially involving blood is unacceptable, only priests handle it. I think this is key, that this shows that all of life, food, sexuality, interaction with the nations, was under Yahweh's benefit. And I want to pause here. Let's just kind of think about this for a second. Now, I wish I could find the exact quote, but it seems like it's. Does it seem like to you that it is almost well-nigh impossible not to stay clean? When you start looking at if a dead animal falls, if you touch a dead animal, it's like, what do you do with that thing dying in your driveway, Well, you got to shovel him out, How do you stay pure? And it's almost like you can't. Or could you? I don't know. It's just like. And so I began looking at some New Testament passages, and Paul talks about his wrestle and struggle with the law. He said the law is holy, and the commandments holy, righteous, and good. But did that which is good become death in me? By no means. But in order that sin might be recognized as sin, it used what is good to bring about my death. So that through the commandments, sin might become utterly sinful. And Paul is saying, the law said, don't covet. Oh man, I'm not going to covet. except I really like your shoes, except I really like your whatever. And Paul is saying the sin brought awareness, or the law brought awareness of sin and made us obey sin even more. I find this interesting, Paul talking to his Jewish audience in Acts 13. Therefore, my friends, I want you to know that through Jesus, the forgiveness of sins is proclaimed to you. Through him, everyone who believes is set free from every sin. A justification you were not able to obtain under the law of Moses. We're going to talk about the Day of Atonement here in a little bit, but it's kind of like there seems to be this indication that, well, there is this indication that the Day of Atonement, though vital and important, just didn't do the trick. The Hebrews writer will make the point. Yeah, it forgave those, but they had to do it every year. If they had really been forgiven, if it had really been sustained, they would have repeated it every year. And now this, what we just mentioned a while ago. Peter said in Acts 15, regarding the Gentile question, now then, why do you test God by putting on the necks of the Gentiles a yoke that neither we nor our ancestors have been able to bear? And it's pretty interesting that it seems like Peter's saying we couldn't do it. And you again look back at this purity code, this holiness, the purity code is like, how can you keep all that up? So I just throw that out there for your consideration, that the law was holy, just, and good, and was our tutor to bring us to Christ. It's like you couldn't do the trick. Any thoughts on that?
Harvey, how could they do all of those things that we talked about through the weeks when they were in exile?
They didn't. And that's part, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's part of the cool thing about the exile. The camp, Israel were the people. They were holy people, a chosen nation, When you go into exile, and the way they went to exile, you have your culture destroyed, you have your religion destroyed, you are in the midst of an unclean people, eating unclean food, doing unclean things. There is simply no way that you can totally be what God wanted you to be when you were in exile. You don't realize the devastating destruction that was. It was a total socio-religious, cultural destruction. Yeah.
Harvey, I've always heard that the synagogue started during that exile period. Was that the Jewish attempt to have some way of getting right with God? Or?
I think so. To worship Yahweh, to have some interaction with Him. If you read carefully Nehemiah and Ezra, they kept careful genealogical records. They knew who was a priest for the most part. They knew who belonged to what tribe. And so they were looking for the time that would come of restoration. In the meantime, how do you worship Yahweh? How do you have interaction with Yahweh? And really, the reading of the Torah, the worship together, and that's out of that arose the synagogue. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because we read about synagogues in the New Testament, we just take that for granted. It's like, where'd that come from? Probably the exile. Anybody else?
Harvey, a somewhat funny book on this, if you've not read it, is called The Year of Living Biblically by A.J. Jacobson. He's agnostic, but he grew up, I guess, in a Jewish family, although he says his family's Jewish, like the Olive Garden is Italian. So he tries to, for a whole year, follow a lot of, no mixed fibers in your clothes. And I want to say he had a chair that his wife could sit on during her, and that was like her reserved chair, so she wouldn't, You know,
She
but
cooperates, that's good.
it's a funny, but it is kind of that where you're like, you know, you can't do all this.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I've heard about that, but I've not read it.
It is good.
But you're saying the Olive Garden isn't really Italian?
No, apparently not.
Oh, dang. All right. Well, how about we leave the purification code?
I have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there anything but soap, just water?
Right.
Well, you're unclean if you don't use soap and water.
Well, according to 21st century American standards, that's correct. Back then, it's kind of like, well, rinse them hands off in running water and be good. Which, by the way, was also problematic. You know, we talk about this fresh water or running water. Where do you get that from?
Streams.
Yeah, out there in the middle of the desert, yeah. Streams, maybe, yeah. So you shouldn't run to the sink and rinse your hands off. Oh, you know, we've had sexual relations. I'm going to go rinse my clothes out. Yeah, how are you going to do that? This is tough.
Okay, something, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go.
So Moses struck the rock.
Yep.
At a stream.
Yep.
This is after that, yes?
Yes, and probably not just a stream, but a big.
Well, it gush of water, yes.
Yeah.
But the point is, at what point in time in history did that dry up and become a desert again? So maybe if they needed running water, maybe that source was available.
Yeah, I'm sure that's where the bulk of it came from. You had to take your pots and pans and go to the stream or to the rivulets that come off of it and fill them up. And of course, when you got to the land, there were a lot of streams in there, and tributaries and etc. for Jordan. Fun, huh? All right. Let's talk about the Day of Atonement, or as you probably hear, Yom Kippur. Yom meaning day, Kippur meaning atonement or cleansing. And this is the biggest day of the Hebrew calendar. This is the day that atonement is made for Israel, for everything, that there is total ritual cleansing and purification. Yes, this is where the two goats come from, the scapegoat. Y'all remember him. If nobody remembers anything else about Yom Kippur, they remember the scapegoat. You know. So we're going to talk about him. Let's see all right. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron who died when they approached the Lord. So harken back to chapter 10. Nadab and Abihu who got burned to a crisp because they brought strange fire to the Lord. And now God references this, and he says, you tell Aaron that he can't come in wherever he chooses into the most holy place. And so you kind of wonder, well, was that part of Nadab and Abihu's little problem there? So he can't come in the most holy place behind the curtain anytime he wants to. He'll die. Or I appear in the cloud over the atonement cover. And so, right here at the beginning of this section, we have this little flashback. Okay, the Day of Atonement was ritual. Now, since you have such a wonderful teacher, I have sat there and I have broken this sucker out. And so we're going to go briefly over this and look at, I only need one, so they have to share it. Nobody has any ritual impurities. And the altar coming, I guess. All right. The Day of Atonement is in chapter 16. All right, we got one. Okay. Got one. Y'all get any back there? Oh, okay, good. Okay. Now, I've broken this out for you, preparation and the procedure, and then afterwards. Okay? So it's going front and back. So let's look and see what happens. If you're the priest, you're going to have to, this is the time, by the way, he doesn't wear the big doings. I don't know whether or not he wore them any other times, but this is like This is major important. You're going to wear the whole outfit. But first God says, since these garments are holy, you're going to have to bathe. So the priest, the high priest, bathes and put on the holy garments. Then we have these critters. A bull for a sin offering. You may remember how the sacrifices are ranked. The bull for the leaders, or for the priests, the ram for the leaders, and so forth, until it gets down to the pigeons for the poor people. Guess who the bull is for? Yes, indeed. It's for Aaron. We have a ram that will be made for a burnt offering for the sins of the people. 2 male goats. Yes. One's a sin offering and the other, yeah, buddy, he gets hauled off to the desert. And then we have a second ram for a burnt offering. So, we have all of those components. The Israelite community is bringing 2 male goats, so there they are. One for the sin offering, one for the scapegoat. The ram is for the burnt offering. So, you have the priest, his offerings for the community, and then one to carry the sins away. Okay, so what happens on the Day of Atonement? This will give you again a little idea. The Holy of Holies in the very back, the holy place. The altar is out front where all the animals are slaughtered. And of course the perimeter of the tabernacle. And then the priest in his amazing clothes. All right. Okay, Aaron has got to do his thing. Let's go back up here. He is to sacrifice, first off, the bull. That's for himself and his household. He is to take a censer of burning coals and an incense, put incense on it for smoke. Okay. In the most holy place, or the holy place, right in here is the altar of incense. So Aaron is to take coals from the altar. He's to walk in and he's gathering incense and putting it on the censer. Smoke arises. He's dressed in his holy garments. He gets to walk into the very presence of Yahweh. This is big, guys. Last time he did this, or somebody did this, he got killed. So Aaron walks in to the most holy place. He takes the blood and the incense. Remember, he sacrificed the bull. So he takes the blood and the incense and goes behind the curtain. He is in the very presence of God. And he takes the blood and he sprinkles it on the front of the ark. So he dips his hand in the little container where it's got. And then he dips his hand and sprinkles 7 times in front of the ark. So why do you do that? Because God said so. All right. Look on the back. Then he takes the goat and slaughters it. The goat is for the people. He sacrificed the bull for himself. And he goes behind the curtain again. So you heard that the high priest only goes in the most holy place one time. Theoretically, yes, but twice on that one time. So now he goes and he takes the goat's blood and he does the same thing. Once on the thing, or once on the ark, 7 times in front of it. Then he goes out and he sprinkles it on the tent of meeting, and then for the altar. And I want you to notice the language here. He makes atonement for the holy place, for the tent of meeting, and for the altar. Oh, wait. Atonement was for people. Remember that atonement is ritual purification. Why is he making atonement for the holy place, the altar? They're inanimate objects. You see, that's the effects of sin. The impurity and uncleanness of all these people weighing in on Yahweh's holy place, it has just seeped in and infiltrated. And now cleanness and purity must take place for everything. Everything. Everybody. The most holy place even is contaminated. The ark is contaminated. the altar is contaminated. You know, it's kind of interesting that he doesn't say the altar of incense, the table of showbread, or the bronze laver. So these are the things that are actively involved in the sacrificial system itself. All right. Isn't that interesting? Y'all find that interesting? I thought that was just pretty incredibly intriguing that atonement is made for these articles, not just for the people, but for the articles as well that are involved in worship. Okay. And notice the reason. And then this is something that was brought up earlier. Let's just look at it. Here's the reasons. Here's why each of these things is done. Because of their uncleanness and rebellion of the Israelites, whatever their sins have been. Because I'm among them in the midst of their uncleanness. I want you to consecrate these articles for the uncleanness of the Israelites. You may remember that when he talks about the sacrifices in 1 through 7, he talks about all this is inadvertent sin, inadvertent sin. And it's like, you know, we're all sitting here wondering, you know, mine are all pretty intentional. What about, I mean, how do you deal with intentional sin? And this is where you get the real core of the coconut, the second one. The rebellion of the Israelites. You see, that's where this intentional part comes in. This is where this intentional part comes in from our sin and from also the Israelite sin. Is that we're telling Yahweh, we're not going to do this. We're kind of like in his face. And so all of these reasons are there. So I just think that's. And again, this is a high holy day. This is the biggie. All right, so we got 2 goats. We've already cast lots for one. So it's up at the top. We slaughtered the goat for the people. We've already sprinkled blood. Okay, goat number 2. And you see, we lay both hands on the goat's head and confess all the sins of the people. We have the chap standing by. What's he going to do? He's going to lead the goat out into the wilderness, outside the camp. What's outside the camp? That's uncleanness, unholiness, filth. So it's away from the fellowship of God and his people. You're going to take all those sins away from him. And then you lead him into the wilderness. I don't know where I picked this up. This is probably an apocryphal story. But they seem to think that maybe the guy that led the goat out would kind of like lead him gently to the edge of a cliff and do some encouragement over it. Because what's the last thing you want? The last thing you want is the goat that's got all the sins of Israel wandering back into the camp for an evening meal. You don't want that. So, whether or not that's true, I kind of like to think it is, but this goat did not come back. Okay, let's go to number 2. Afterwards, you got the guy that's led the goat out. Well, he and also the guy who burns the ashes of the sacrifices outside the camp. They have to wash their clothes. They can come back in and eat. They're ritually unclean because they played with the sinful things. The priest takes off his grand garments. Excuse me. Remember, this is a day of where you humble yourselves, it's said. This is a day of no work. This is a day of fasting. This is a day where likely to maintain your consecration and refrain from sexuality. You just did everything in prayer and meditation and thought process. Turn your hearts to God and receive the forgiveness that he freely offers. And then, of course, we find out later in the book of Numbers that the trumpet was to be blown at that time. Okay. You really should get a good grip on this because this plays big into the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews, in a nutshell, says we've got a better lawgiver, a better Sabbath rest, a better high priest, a better covenant, and a better sacrifice. And so I'll invite you to turn to Hebrews chapter 9 and 10. And we'll quickly skate through those. Because the Hebrews writer has a lot to say about the tabernacle. He has a lot to say about the worship. Let's look at Hebrews 9, and we'll start with verse. He describes the furniture. And then in verse 7, but only the high priest entered the inner room, and that only once a year, and never without blood, which he offered for himself and for the sins of the people who had committed in ignorance. Okay, so there you have the bull, you have the goat. The Holy Spirit was showing me that by this, that the way into the most holy place had not been yet disclosed as long as the first tabernacle was still standing. You say, oh, not yet disclosed? You mean now it is disclosed. This is the illustration, verse 9, of the present time, indicating that gifts and sacrifices being offered were not able to clear the conscience of the worshiper. Okay, I thought atonement was made for Israel. It is. I thought they were forgiven. They are. But they were only fleshly things. The matter of food and drink and various ceremonial washings, external regulations applying until the time of the new order. Now you know what those external regulations are, those washings, etc. When Christ came as high priest of the good things that are already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle. Oh, so, okay, tell me more. That is not man-made, that is to say not a part of this creation. He didn't enter by means of blood of goats and calves. Oh, yeah, the bulls, the rams, etc. But he entered the holy place once for all, by his own blood having obtained eternal redemption. The blood of goats and bulls and ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who were ceremonially unclean, sanctify them so that empowered them clean. How much more? And folks, this is where it really gets down to me and you. How much more? Then, will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself as unblemished to God, cleanse our consciousness from actively to death so that we may serve the living God? And so you think about that. Why did they have to offer these sacrifices year after year? Why did they atonement year after year? Because they really didn't do the trick. Why did Jesus die one time? Because that seal was there. And he entered the holy place, not the blood of bulls and goats, but with whose blood? His own. And we almost have this concept of this Yom Kippur, or this ceremony where Jesus walks into this great throne room of God with his own blood. And there's this eternal redemption that's done. Pretty powerful stuff. Look at verse 15. For this reason, Jesus is the mediator of a new covenant, that those who are called, who's that? You. May receive the promised eternal inheritance now that he has died as a ransom to set them free from the sins committed under the first covenant. See, the blood of Jesus, we can see how it does it like presently, but it also does it futurely for generations yet unborn. But he even reached back to these people and cleansed them. And maybe even for those righteous Gentiles in the past who were not part of the people of God. It's big stuff. Look at verse 23. It was necessary then for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these sacrifices, but the heavenly things themselves are better sacrifices. Jesus didn't enter a man-made sanctuary that was only a copy of the true one. He entered heaven itself. Now to appear for us in God's presence. Nor did he enter heaven to offer himself again and again the way the high priest enters the most holy place every year with blood not his own. Then he would have to suffer many times since the creation of the world. But now he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to do away with sin by the sacrifice of himself. Wow. Just as man is destined to die once and after that to face judgment, so Jesus was sacrificed once to take away the sins of the people, and he will appear a second time not to bear sin, but bring salvation to those who are waiting. You know, that passage, we always like to beat people over the head with that. Jesus, it's appointed man to die once, and after this comes judgment. when you look at that in the whole framework of this passage, it's kind of like, yeah, it's good. Everything's settled. I'm done. This is good. Then chapter 10, 1 through 4, we won't look at all of this, but again, these sacrifices are even a reminder of sins. The fact that Jesus did that. Look at verse 10. By that will we've been made holy through the sacrifice of the Lord Jesus Christ once for all. Folks, we're forgiven. Next week, you speak to the Israelites and the entire assembly of Israel, saying, "Be holy, because I, Yahweh your God, am holy." We're going to talk about the holiness code next week. Woohoo! Aren't you glad to be done with discharges and etc.? Do not underestimate Yom Kippur. This is the main passage about Yom Kippur in the entire Bible. So, well, blessings. Hope your week's great. Stay clean.